All right, let's just get started then, huh? Chat. We have to like
Little
fit
chomp.
chat into it somehow, like the chomp.
Yeah.
All right, so welcome back to the second episode of this segment where we do. We're calling it Chatmonster Chomp now. That's the new name. Where we just review an album on the first listen, real quick, without giving it any time. We just review it right off the dome. We are going to be doing an album that came out just a couple days ago. Actually, came out on March 12th. Today's St. Patrick's Day. You do the math. It's called Notes with Attachments by Pino, Palladino, and Blake Mills. It's a jazz instrumental album that I know almost nothing about. So without further ado, I guess we should get started.
Chat.
The first song is called Just Wrong, and it's got a little star next to it on Apple Music, so you know it's going to be...
Okay.
All right, so first song, Just Wrong.
I think the beginning was very surprising because I think the percussion hits were immediately to tell you that, you know, they're going to be experimental or just like, but I kind of wish that they had more of these sporadic percussion hits. This is obviously a mixed barrel, just a bunch of ideas, not a lot of repeating themes from what I can tell off of first listen. It's very rapid and just trying to... Like, it sounded like a portfolio that you send in to, like, a recording school. Like, oh, look, I can, like, kind of do these things.
I also thought this first song was a little surprising. I just didn't expect this. It never really settled on an idea. It was constantly changing, constantly developing. You could hear the twang of, like, a sitar for, like, just, one measure or something. It just came and went. I really liked that off-kilter drum thing. I wish that had lasted longer.
It'd be cool to see where the album goes from here because, like Victor said, it feels like a bunch of ideas mixed into one. However, I do think there's a bit of cohesion. It almost felt like world building. I would try and have some visual aspect to help me. The day starting, like, you know, the sun has just come up. The newspaper man is handing out newspapers. People are walking their dogs. And it almost felt like we were picking at one person within that day.
It's hard to remember each sound, but I feel like the mixes of, like, the soundtracky parts, you know, left something to be desired. I feel like the cooler, like, you know, focusing more on the guitar parts seemed more complete. But I think, what was I going to say?
Therefore I am.
I think that...
The second song is called Soundwalk. That sounds actually pretty cool.
Tough piece of music.
That was a fun...
I hated that song. I thought, like, pretty much from, like, the get-go of the you got the idea that it was just gonna be a slow walk, a slow sound walk, if you will. I guess the most that I can give is that I don't really like the way the instruments came together. The combination of, like, the high pitched horns with that, like, bassy undertone, like, sound, maybe like a bass clarinet, I just thought was like, and then tackle that with, like, the, I guess if you call it, auxiliary percussion that was acting as, like, the driving note. I don't know, it was just very sluggish for me. I wasn't that much of a fan of that.
I think that the overdrive bass was cool. I think there wasn't a lot of sounds that popped. Like, the higher pitches didn't, like, stand out for as much as me. I feel like I wanted a sound to cut through and maybe disrupt more. There were some, like, sweeping synths. The end, I think, was terrible. I think the end was the worst part because it was just, like, supposed to leave a lot of questions, but there wasn't a lot of exciting sort of conversation going on, you know, in the last minute and a half. So I was just like, I don't even care about the questions that this ending leaves.
I liked that it was so it felt like I was taking a nice relaxed walk, you know, through all these sounds. Especially in the beginning, I loved how it started off really choppy and then it developed into these slightly longer phrases with the saxes. I also liked how, I'm guessing it was like a really breathy, like tenor sax or something was doubling the bass part. I didn't catch that until the last, like, 30 seconds or something, but I thought that was kind of cool. Come to a head at some point, like come to some sort of climax, but then I was like, that's not the point. They just want you to just kind of take this, you know, slow trip. Écoute? I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Pino Palladino. He has one song with 35 million plays.
All
Gotta
right.
take care of someone.
So that was Écoute. I don't know how to say it. I'm just gonna forget about that. I thought the beginning was really cool. It was, like, really hard to tell what the time was. It was like,
See ya.
See ya, Dita.
And for that reason, I'm out.
into that, like, groove thing they had going in the A section. It's really strong development. It was, like, it grooved like the best of any song I think we've heard so far on this album. I think what the album title means now, it's like they get, like, a central idea and kind of loop it, and then they just throw in every measure, like, a new sound or different sounds. And new ideas like with different horns and synths and whatnot, and those are the so they have the notes, which are the core rhythm or groove, and then the attachments are these extra things that they throw in all the time. The distorted horns and winds were a really interesting idea. Usually you hear horns and winds and people want them to be as clean and pure as possible to cut through the rest of the mix. And then I thought in that A section, there was a part when the drums switched to like, I think they were playing on like the rims and maybe a cowbell, and the mixing went to like super deep, like reverb. I thought that was a cool thing they did.
I think this song brought in some more of the like blatantly experimental aspects that I might want to, gravitate toward to in like a style or a genre like this. I think the sputtering guitar and like the sharp chords at the beginning were really cool, and I think there was a lot of cool like starts to sections. I don't like when they're so quick to just add ideas. That's just a personal thing. Like it's just like let it sit a little longer. I sort of get the philosophy of this song, and it become more clear after this song, is that this is basically a 20-minute song. This is a 20-minute experimental jazz song, but cut down to 5 minutes, and they're just adding all of the sounds and all the little sputterings like that, and it's going by like that. I think the ideas are cool. I really like the kind of household or weird percussion that was like for 2 minutes. I really like the elephant sax in the transitions.
Kind of like how I mentioned in the first track, I wish they had like developed their themes a bit more. I think this one is leaning towards that more in the way that I like. So it's just like such hard transitions. It's almost like hard, not like hard to understand, but it's hard to break out of that mindset where coming from someone like, this is probably a trope that if you're a jazz listener, like this is probably, just ignore this trope. But if you're going from like Miles Davis, like where they have like Bitches Brew, or like a tribute to Jack Johnson where they're like two 4 songs and they're like, it's like an hour long. They have like a lot of time to develop their ideas and let people go for like 64 bars or however many bars. So it is such a like hard transition to go from that to this.
All right, I'm gonna start it.
That was like I thought that blew me away. That was really
Two songs.
I think I had like the same amount of ambition with its movement in like different themes and like melodies, but the use of like only like a handful of instruments, not even like more than that, really came together. It was like 30 seconds for an idea, where this one is like 2 minutes for just like
The whole song.
for like the whole song.
Yeah, this song to me felt like, and we'll find out, like a transitional song, like kind of like almost like an interlude, open and flowing. It feels at times almost like serene. I wrote down some notes. It feels almost like cinematic. It's very these long tones with these warm instruments.
Almost an ambient electronic song. I think the mix makes a lot more sense here, especially on the traditional like jazz instruments. Sharp guitars and sputtering guitars I think were cool, but it was hard to mix in the saxes and stuff, or at least they didn't fit as well. I feel like they didn't have as good of an idea of how to mix those sounds together, but I feel like this made a lot more sense. It's a lot more straightforward in what it's trying to do, just like an ambient type of track.
Next, we've got Jerkle or your Jerkle.
Jerkle.
I think I know what this album was missing for me, and I've just heard a bit of it, is the noise. They went more noisy on this track, which I'm a fan of. I wish they went harder. They're not noise musicians, I guess, but the horn or sax, I couldn't exactly tell. I can't remember. But that was mixed quite well, and it was swelling, and it caught my attention, and it was just stingy enough. But also there was a lot of space in that latter part. The guitars weren't as loud, and the drums had like drive, but they weren't overly reverb. Like there was a lot more space, and then the noise came in, and it made me appreciate the themes a lot more. And the A section, or the first section, came back a lot, which I enjoyed, just kind of hearing it in a slightly different context, less like crazy fluttering synths all the time. But there wasn't a lot of distortion in the track. So when that noisy part came in, I was like, oh, this is so great. Like, because it's like, it's not counterbalanced. It's like, it's such a unique part.
I was guessing it was a horn. I think they used horns and saxes on those like overblown parts. I thought that was really cool because it wasn't overly experimental. It was just like kind of out there, but it sounded really cool. In the beginning, I thought the guitar part, I know they're not guitars and I should know what they are, but I thought that part was kind of strange for like a jazz album, but it made for a really interesting bass. These songs are very, very intricate. There's a lot going on that it's you can't really hear everything. There's, drums and bass and horns and strings and guitars, and there's just so much going on. They were still thinking about the previous song, especially in the beginning. There's a lot of those long tones and slight dissonances on the harmonies that they used a lot in the previous song, kind of carried over into this song as, it kind of transitioned away from that very open style into this much more traditional song.
I don't know how to express my feelings for this song. I don't really think, while this was like more traditional, I don't really think this one clicked as much as like the previous ones. I think all of the components, they complement each other, but not, I guess, like not traditionally, which makes for like a very interesting jazz like sections, like with sides. Like we have like the A side and the B side. But I don't think structurally having like the hits or like the I guess if you want to call like the pre-chorus, it just, the melding of all of the structures and all of the components of this song didn't really come together for me.
I see what Carlos is saying. It's hard to follow. I mean, and there's like a million things I don't remember about this song. But for me, I think the returning to the A section was what did it, and the less frantic, chronology of the song.
On the final stretch here, this song is called Chris Dave. All right, we're back. Following Chris Dave. The first thing I wrote, I called it kitchen percussion because it sounds like just stuff you'd find in your kitchen or like maybe jungle type of percussion. I thought that was really cool. You don't really hear that a lot. It seems to me that their thought process on this song was they came up with this somewhat complex drum groove and they came up with a bass part and they said, okay, we've got our bass, start throwing stuff on top of it, like, strings here and there, and just keep the drums and bass pretty much the same and just insert stuff as we go along. And I thought that worked pretty well. Was that the winds, I just the winds, everything else that wasn't drums and bass kind of sounded like if I took my MIDI keyboard and I set my plug-in to winds and just played like chords, because it was all unison and they would like kind of float in and then float out and then float in and float out.
So a lot of the ideas I found really interesting and I wish they would develop them more. But I think instead they decided to tackle on new ideas or like new instruments, and even at times completely new passages. But nothing here is clicking with me.
The drum beat was a nice change of pace, very energetic. I feel like you take every song square one. I feel like there's not a lot of attachment to the notes, as the title would suggest. I think the mix and the sound of the swelling flute or wind was probably my favorite texture of this whole project. I think it was really solid. I wish I could hear it more. The name is kind of fun because it seems like maybe this is like an old college friend or something, and he was like really fun to hang around, and he like...
Who is Chris Dave?
Yeah, he's got to be a cool guy.
All right, and we move on to the second to last song, Man from Molise.
All right, well, I like that one. I'm not sure if I can tell you why. It's funny. I was at office hours today because I went to talk to my English teacher about how to get better at analyzing art. This is just
a real challenge.
I'm completely embarrassed on this.
They're so weird and like, I've never heard any songs like this album. it's just so...
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard any.
These guys have such a unique approach to what it means to like write a song. Sometimes they'll just like abandon the traditional idea of like tempo, or they'll like ignore where you might put a bar line. Like a bass riff will just go for like 2.5 bars or something totally weird and doesn't really make sense.
I feel that this does push a lot of boundaries. I don't think that this is, for me, it doesn't feel like totally like next level experimental, like out of this world. Like to me, it feels more like they're having fun. Like I feel like I've heard experimental music that, like this isn't opening up new grounds for me, but I definitely see what you're saying. This song, for me, just a slight thing is I think they're reluctant to remove the drums. It seemed like, can't remember, but I feel like in previous songs, they didn't the drums weren't as prominent and they were more able to like fill more of the space. I do like the drum beat, but I feel like especially when it transitioned into I don't know what style of guitar playing that was, I feel like it was just a little bit too busy and I wanted to hear that riff more. And especially the second riff, I actually really liked the sound of it, or at least the start of it as it meandered or whatever. But I feel like they're a little bit reluctant to drop the drums lower. It was like a submerged documentary or something type soundtrack, except obviously a little bit more frantic. But then it sounded like, you're coming up out of the submarine, and then you're just like, going onto a foreign land, and then you like see a player there, and he's like playing his style of guitar, which I think was kind of an interesting narrative.
What makes it so hard to digest is because it's not like completely new or original that it hasn't been heard of, but it's also not something that is super familiar that you hear every day. It's sort of in that middle zone. Like what the word is, like irrational maybe. But
They use a lot of interesting instruments that you wouldn't expect in commercial music or wouldn't expect in jazz music. I think at the beginning, and I guess all through, I think that's a concert bass drum, which I've like probably never heard in a commercial song. It seems like each of these songs kind of exist in its own world. Like the last one was like jungly. This one is like Middle Eastern, maybe. I think that's kind of cool that they're all unique and they can exist in their own like base or whatever. The last song, Off the Cuff, Searcher's favorite musical phrase.
Oh yeah, out the cuff.
You must have seen that then when you said that in the beginning.
What I have to say, they were marching to the close, which I think is a strong idea. They got a little bit annoying. I didn't really love the way the sound like hit. I didn't like the crunchy sound of it. I think the synths were placed well in the mix, and I think there was a lot of cool retreating little sounds. It reminded me of like what might be in the credits of a Twin Peaks episode. Very meandering and unclear and confused, much like the rest of the record. And the sound palette reminded me of like the 80s Twin Peaks sort of sound. Not a lot happens in this song. Like I don't think this is a banger. I don't think this is a song that if people listened would go back to a lot. This is a song that you would maybe ask a lot from, but it just kind of gives you what it wants to give you. And I kind of like that attitude.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this one. This is the first song that's kind of thumped me. Like Victor said, there's not really a lot happening. I liked the drum and bass part. It took me a while, but I figured out it's in 7, just like the last song. They have these drumsticks that are kind of like brushes, but they're made of wood. It's this little like bundle of like little wooden cylinders, I guess. So it's like kind of in between a drumstick and a brush, and I think that's might have been what he was using, which is kind of cool because you don't hear that a lot. And then the other thing was those synths kind of like cutting in every so often reminded me, Carlos, you might know, the Radiohead song Feral.
You just gotta expect the unexpected when it comes to the end or to any song of within this project. I was expecting something different, but this totally makes sense within this realm. Like a big juxtaposition with the opener, which is very, very hectic and there was a lot of movement. But this one, I think it was like pretty much like the same drum rhythm throughout the whole song. I think I liked it. I'm not sure. I still have some feelings in it that I need to reach out and grab for.
It definitely takes more than one time through to start to understand. There's so many different ideas. But now that we've reached the end, we can talk about the record as a whole. We can give our little closing thoughts. I like this album a lot. Okay, I thought the songs were really unique. I thought the sounds were really unique. I really liked these guys' approach to writing music. It was totally not what I expected when I read that it was a jazz album, because it's not really a jazz album. It's just kind of like an album. It's really hard to put a label on it. I do wish some of the songs were longer, maybe. Some ideas were a little bit more fleshed out, but I think the album demands more listens. I don't really think I have any complaints. I don't think I would have to listen to it a few more times before I can complain, because it's just so complex and unique. On our fancy thumbs up scale, I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up. I liked it a lot.
Notes with Attachments is one of the more interesting albums that I've heard, not because it's something completely new or something completely familiar. Like I mentioned before, it's right in the middle in that no man's land where Victor mentioned that. I think that's a good way to describe it, because you should really go into this with an open mind and just take it how you get it on the first listen, and then go from there, like probably 5 more listens until I actually get an idea of what I think. But for now, I guess I'll give it, okay, I'm gonna do like
right in the middle,
because I still don't know my thoughts.
I think this album was pretty good. I'm a little reluctant to give them a lot of props. I haven't listened to a lot of experimental jazz, but I think one thing that I'm sort of formulating and thinking is I don't really love the mix. I don't like that it's not super noisy, it's not super fast, and when things come in, they have really good ambient parts, but I feel like I just want to hear some of these sounds expressed more, especially because I think that the mix and the textures of an experimental jazz or a noisy type of thing, it's like those are so important, but I feel like they don't really care about that because they're just looking for the next idea. So I'm going to give it like around a 1.5. So like this.
Like it or not, I think it just offers a really unique perspective on songwriting and song structures and your traditional perspective of what a song should be or could be. I mean, it's something so out of left field that I think it would, even if you don't like it, offer you just something totally different, that you can experience in the musical world that's not so regular in terms of structure and sound palette. I think it would be a good experience for anyone to listen to this album. All right, and we come to the end of our second episode of what is this? What do we call it? Chatmonster Chomp. Rolls off the tongue. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you choose to listen to this album, let us know what you thought. If you can even formulate a thought. If you can't, then you can talk to Carlos.
Benny.
Is that your smelling salts?
Yeah, you gotta wake up, bro.
I'm
You're
cooked.
Sleep right now.
You're like,
I'm cooked.
yeah. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Either way, we're probably gonna do more of them.
Probably.